What do you have to say aloud?
Got it.
Don't need to warm it.
I have a little next to my in the living room.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Oh, Jeannie's not here again.
Not you, Jeannie, not Jenny.
Jeannie of Washington. She's lived in Asia and had a Hanuman statue. So anyway, she'll be watching on the video. So this is what I'm doing next week. It's the history of the residency. So we'll be canceling next week. So you'll remember last week I talked about this novel, Rumors of Peace. And so I'm mentioning this talk on October 29th to the Martinez Historical Society. And part of that reason for reading this novel was for the talk I was going to give them, because it all takes place in Martinez. And last week I have referred to it for the UN founding, which she as a 12-year-old went to, and she put it into the novel. But the other thing that is in the novel, and Rudy was alerted to it right away when I told him what I was reading, he asked, well, there's got to be something about the Port Chicago disaster. And there was. There wasn't at the time he asked the question, but I finished that part. I finished the whole novel. And the Port Chicago disaster is important. He alludes to it in the book, and I think I mentioned this last week. She's walking to school, which is the same way I walked after I parked my car, because the high school's right next to the hospital. And so I'm familiar with walking through the Thule fog and hearing the foghorns. Not so much foghorns anymore, but there was 50 years ago when I first arrived. And refers to the ghosts of dead sailors. And so what's that all about? So the Port Chicago disaster killed 320 sailors and civilians. Port Chicago is, I think, about 3 miles from Martinez on the Carquinez Strait, Sacramento River. And another 390 were injured. 2/3 of the dead and injured were enlisted African-American sailors. So this had huge repercussions. A mutiny of the African-American military and a trial, the Port Chicago 50. And they were all convicted. 47 of them were released in January of 46. But it raised all kinds of questions about fairness. How's come they were assigned to this highly dangerous job? And one thing led to another, and ultimately it was the desegregation of our armed forces. So Homer's father, I think, would have experienced that and lived through some of that. And that was Harry Truman. Harry Truman has always been quoted as saying how embarrassed he was as a colonel in World War I that he was never allowed to deploy African Americans, because most of the military officers in World War I were from the South and refused to even use African American soldiers. So the French said, if you're not using them, could we borrow them? And they served in the French army and were well decorated. All right, so this is the part where we do a few book reviews. There have been quite a few books rolling out, and I want to spend a little bit of time because they have a connection to the topics we're following, but in particular, the history of California and capitalism. So take it away, Carol. Carol made the recommendation.
So I read Palo Alto, and I have to say, part of why I picked up the book is because so many of you guys, and I mean the men, because I don't know what the women were there, are Stanford people, and we're talking about Stanford. And it's supposed to be a really interesting book. It's a tome. It's like 700 pages long or something. And it's it has a very, unlike this class, it has a very specific point of view that is drummed home, which is, I think he's really a Marxist. But what I thought was interesting and how it related back to this class is it's the history of California and how California becomes so powerful in terms of the economics of California in the world, California being the fifth largest, I think we're still the fifth largest economy in the world if you just take California's economy. I think it sort of parallels a lot of the history in general, but the history of California, I think, is interesting in that economic piece. And he references various things that have gone on in California's history, like the Japanese internment, which I've been doing a lot of studying about, but also just in general. And it's a very, I have to say, he's pretty negative about Leland Stanford and how Stanford came into being. And I think there are places where he could be a little more balanced than he actually is. But I'd be interested if anybody else reads it, what they think about it. So I didn't plan to do a big lecture on Palo Alto, but it's an interesting book if you have time to read that many pages.
Yeah.
So how far up in history does Malcolm take the history? Does it take it up to the 90s, the 2020s? How late does he take it?
I can't remember where he actually ends, but he definitely takes it up through the 90s and through, I think he just ends right at that crux. So, he talks about the Black Panthers. He talks about, so he's taking it up through the beginning of the real power of Silicon Valley also and he views Silicon Valley as a definite offshoot and foundationally from Stanford, which I think is pretty accurate.
Just a comment. One is Ginny is also a Stanford grad.
Yay! Hey, let's hear it.
So some of the women. And if you go back to your other slide, it's Hewlett and Packard, A-R-D, not Packard. They were fraternity. They're in the same fraternity as my dad, class of 1933. My father was also an engineer. But he didn't go into their garage. He was interested in aeronautical engineering and ended up in public service as an Air Force career officer. So really? Sometimes I look at the Hewlett and Packard families and look at ours and sort of wonder.
So far.
Yes, so far.
That's interesting.
And David Packard, the junior, David Packard's son, wanted nothing to do with inheriting the company. He was interested in linguistics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He was a friend of my brother's.
So I heard an interview with the author and Harris, and this is where the list comes from, just the things that he mentioned in the interview. But yeah, certainly Carroll's right. He's very negative about Leland, Stanford, and by the way, there's a biography out of Leland, Stanford. I haven't read it yet, but at some point when we get to that point of California history, that would be a natural thing to read. But the thing that he made a big deal about in the interview was the bet that Leland Stanford had with another business associate, that the four legs of the horse, when it gallops, all four leave the ground. And this bet grew and grew in importance between the two of them. So they used the most modern technology. This would, I think, it had been around the 1880s, 1890s, that photography could muster something called moving pictures. And they used this new technology to settle their bet. And Harris makes the argument that this was really the birth of the movie industry, and that California can claim that. Now, New Jersey claims it because of Thomas Edison and his lab. But it was interesting early on, there was another technology for using projectors. And there was this huge suit because Edison claimed patent infringement for this other technique of projecting movies. And the people he was suing, they moved to California, and they wanted to be as close to the border as possible to escape any attempt to arrest them or be served a subpoena. So that was one reason why they located in Southern California. But of course, the nice weather down there made making movies easy all year round. And one of the big movies that they made took place on Catalina Island, Homer. And it was a Western in the 1920s, silent film. And to make the movie, they imported buffalo to give it authenticity. And then when the movie was done shooting, somebody, well, what do we do about the buffalo? Just leave them alone. They left, and the buffalo changed the environment of the island, just devastated the natural flora and fauna, as you can imagine. And it was a reclamation project that began in the 1970s that had to resort, because the takeover of Alcatraz, there was an increased sensitivity to Native Americans. And the Sioux claimed that the buffalo was a sacred animal. So they had to, when they moved the buffalo, have a ceremony every step of the way. They had to bless the buffalo after they were gathered, before they were loaded on the flatbed ferries that took them to the mainland. They had to be blessed before they were put on the railroad, and then they had to be blessed before they got off and loaded onto trucks. But the Sioux were very interested in getting the Santa Catalina buffalo. Why? Because their plains buffalo, they had miscegenated with cows, and there was no more pure buffalo DNA by that time. And at least this is the history I read. It sounds improbable, but this is the history we got when we visited Santa Catalina. So that's the story of the movie industry in Santa Catalina. But I know Bob's got his hand up. Bob, take it away.
Well, I wanted to hear the outcome of the bet on whether all four limbs of the horse left the ground. I mean, I think I know the answer.
Well, tell us, because I forgot.
I mean, it was the use of slow motion photography, I guess, as you're saying, in the early days of the movie industry, which I think, oh Lord, I hope I'm right, demonstrated that the answer is no. The horse always has one hoof, at least.
My recollection is they all are up at one time. That was using freeze frame. We can check it. In fact, I'll bet you. I'll make a bet with you on this.
Oh dear.
This is getting bad.
They are all four up, because that's Muybridge's famous, early motion pictures, because they took all those shots and then they put it on a reel.
Well,
did it frame by frame.
Nevertheless, I'll simply make a sort of digression or linkage that I know that John loves, is that today's Nobel Prize for Physics has a connection, because it's been awarded to three physicists who used short flashes of lasers to actually see how electrons move, because they move too quickly for other means. So that's really the same story as the bet on the horse.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Okay, John, you of course have a picky audience here, but the first center for movies was Niles in Northern California, not Hollywood.
But you're right.
But that Edison suit would have been before the industry shifted southward.
Yeah, a lot of the Tom Mix movies were made right here locally in Alameda County and Niles. It's quite a interesting history. My Stanford buddy, who grew up on the same block as me in Indianapolis, is really into railroads. And so he goes out to Niles just because I think as part of the movie set they had rails. So Bob, is your hand up again?
No, I got to take it down.
Okay. Well, as long as we're talking about Nobel Prizes, Carol will remember as soon as the messenger RNA technology became known, we did a deep dive on Katia Kariko and her story. And I think, and I've been whining about this, especially to our next door neighbor, Stephanie, who is a scientist as well, that Kariko got shortchanged last year. She should have got the Nobel last year. And her story is amazing. She's Hungarian, born in Hungary. And where does she go in the 1990s to pursue her dream, which she's really totally into DNA and RNA. And she winds up at the University of Pennsylvania. And she gets the idea there. She gets tenure on the basis of some of the papers that she's put out about messenger RNA, and that it could be used in the way that we're all familiar with. But in the 1990s, it was thought to be impossible. And so her story from then on was how to deliver the messenger RNA into animals. And she was met with failure after failure. And after 10 years, the University of Pennsylvania demoted her. And she had to move out of her office. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And then, so she got the Nobel Prize yesterday with a guy named Weissman, and they teamed up, and together they figured out that you could wrap the messenger RNA in microglobules. And that's the way, in fact, that one of the ways now that it's delivered by Pfizer. So they discovered that. They saw the potential, but the startup that bet on her and the potential that she was presenting in her pitch was a German startup, genetic. Yeah, thank you. And guess what? That company was started by 2 Turkish immigrants to Germany. So it was really an international effort when you think about a Hungarian and Turks and Germany wrapped in there because that's where the immigrants were. So immigrants, as the line in Hamilton, immigrants do great things because he was, of course, from the Caribbean. It's a wonderful story. And then Pfizer saw the potential, and they came in with the big bucks after this little bio outfit had taken Carico to the next level. So it's a very heartwarming story to see how she persevered and did it.
John, it's Homer, sorry again, but because I consult for some biotech companies developing antiviral drugs, they take real heart from how many years she was in the wilderness before her ideas were recognized as having any value. Because they're very used to being ignored, ghosted, papers rejected without really any coherent reason.
That works for free.
And I end up working for free.
But one day you'll be famous and we'll all say, well, that's because you got there because of Homer.
Please do. We've come because we won't be around, I'm sure.
No, but the other thing I think with this Nobel Prize that they got was they didn't wait, another 40 years past the significance of their discoveries.
Yeah, it'd be good to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah, actually, COVID should be getting partial credit.
Yeah,
for spurring their development.
Yep, it's the challenges that we respond to. That's for sure. So let's see, where was I here? Oh, yeah. So this was a subtitle of an article that was a review of it, New York Times. Can one city be a microcosm that everything that you can blame everything on? Malcolm Harris this is his hometown, and back to the list, very familiar. What
raised
is
hand?
What?
I've had a raised hand for some time.
I don't see a raised hand.
No.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Our friends at Google say, in the gait known as the gallop, all 4 feet leave the ground, but not when the legs are outstretched, as you might expect. In reality, the horse is airborne when its hind legs swing near the front legs, as shown in photos. So that's the answer.
Thank you, Jim. So fix your raised hand. Did anybody else see?
I see it.
Huh.
yeah, I didn't see it.
I just speak up.
Okay, sorry. Iko, you be my monitor. I don't know why I didn't see his hand. There's just one thing here I thought was interesting. The Xerox Research Lab near Palo Alto, they developed a lot of the technology that Steve Jobs eventually used, something called GUMI. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's a way of representing things, images digitally, I think. Well, but they didn't know what they had. And Steve Jobs kind of was wandering around. This was his garage period. And he would go and visit the Xerox labs and realized that they had something big. And he negotiated a deal where he got to use it. And that was an important thing. So, and I know Jenny did a lot of computer work in the early days. I remember in the 60s in med school that Jenny was doing computer stuff.
I was just a programmer, though, a mere programmer. I didn't do any developmental work.
Oh, okay. Michael.
I think what you're referring to is the graphical user interface, GUI, and they also had WWII, what you see is what you get. Those were the terms they were using. The GUI, what you see is what you get.
All right, cool. Thank you. The New York Times Review was written by Gary Kamiya. And Ramsey, if you ever watch this video, a shout out to you. Ramsey gave me Kamiya's book, Cool Gray City of Love. And it is a reference to an early poem in the 19th century about San Francisco. And this book, you can see 49 views of San Francisco. So those of us that are interested in Japanese art are familiar with the 37 views of Mount Fuji, or
I forget how many
30 some views of Kamiya, of course, is half Japanese, and he wrote this book, and he also wrote the review of Palo Alto, Carol. And so I read it, and I love it. And guess what? It is full of history. You have to search for it. It's splattered, but it's mostly great walks in San Francisco. Now, when we were in medical school and falling in love with San Francisco, there was a book about great walks in San Francisco by Margaret Dose Patterson, I think, something like that. Well, Kamiya, who grew up in the Bay Area, went to school in Berkeley, was familiar with this. And so he realized that it needed to be updated. There's some, I think one of the best histories of early San Francisco that I've read is his chapter called Huck's Hideaway. So I wrote to him and said, boy, really enjoyed Huck's Hideaway. Do you ever lead walks? You talk about all these walks. And he wrote back and said, yes, I do. And so we've reserved him for October 30th. I think Rudy and Homer are on board. He has kind of arbitrarily put a limit of 8 people, but then I think he went up to 10. We hope that Homer's knee will be healed by then, because the walk that he and I chose were the walk up Telegraph Hill. It was one of his top three. And I love that chapter, but I suppose we could switch if there's still a mobility issue. But anyway, he's very active. He's written a history column. He's very knowledgeable about history, which is packed into the book, and wrote a column for San Francisco Examiner. So I might be in negotiation with him to expand the group if there's interest. Okay. So any comments on California, the topics that we've talked, which I've really enjoyed this conversation, by the way. Okay. So let's move on to Robert Kaplan. He is the author of another book that I'm going to recommend. I've already recommended one of his books called The Tragic Mind, and that you can't always get what you want, which a lot of us are experiencing in the agonies of Ukraine. I think I've put this up a couple of times already, but just to emphasize it, this is a great podcast. These two guys really know their stuff. But his new book is The Loom of Time. And if you look at the chapters, it goes from the Aegean to China. He doesn't call it the Silk Road, but it is. And reading it is a little bit like reading the book that Ramsey gave us to read, Silk Roads, plural. Speaking of which, Ramsey and Janet are back. I don't know if Barbara can give us a update. I've written to them a couple of times, but I think they're in re-entering with their family and doing all
parts of it, but not that.
Okay.
They're busy with grandchildren.
Yes, that's
but,
what.
But they're good. They're really glad to be back.
Good.
They had a wonderful, wonderful trip, beyond their highest expectations. They had a great time.
That's Morocco in the picture, right?
Oh, that might be. Well, sure.
No, that is not Morocco.
Oh, looks like the Great Mosque there, but
yeah, but I don't think it is.
Well, they've been to Morocco about a year ago, but this was in their slide stack from this trip.
Okay.
So I'm not sure which. Shall we wager? I'm going to go with Tashkent. We'll see. This is the table of contents. I'd say the first two chapters are kind of overloaded with references. It really takes off, though, into more like a travelogue storytelling in chapter 3. And I'm up through chapter 7, and I found each chapter really, really good. So I'm enjoying it. I think he borrowed the title from The Loom of History, which is about Asia Minor, and a wonderful book that both Ramsey and I have quoted. Okay, just a couple of updates on previous talks. You remember our story about Lee. We picked him up in May when he got into a spat with us at the Shangri-La Security Dialogue, refused to meet with Austin. Now, last week we said he's disappeared, and it turns out he's under investigation for corrupt procurement. I think I mentioned in his biography that one of the reasons that Trump put him on the bad guy list was that he was he was buying military equipment from Russia. And apparently he kept some of the money for himself. So I've been whining about Iraq and W. Bush and the invasion in 2003 for a long time. And last week, I had this picture of the City Hall and the Civic Center. And I went back through my files and archives and came up with documentation on the Peace March in October of 2002, which is before a year before the invasion, or maybe 6 months. And actually found the article that made me mad because they dismissed me as a grizzled hippie. I was only 61. And I asked in my email to a historian friend, which I kept, could this be one of the big moments of history? And here I find myself whining that it was a big moment in history. I said we could choose between following the Hawks and eliminating any risk of Saddam having weapons, or we could work within the framework of the UN. And over again, we're hearing now about our failure to work within the UN and that we're such hypocrites for asking people to follow the rule of law. And I think we missed an opportunity to set a precedent for not using the massive military superiority that we had and being restrained. Homer.
Well, I wonder if you read Tom Hartman, Hartmann. He publishes every morning. He's very big on the mistake of Iraq in shaping our current troubles in the Middle East and, in fact, in much of the world.
Well, he was the same guy that gave credence to Jeremy's critique of Antifa.
That's right.
So I'm going to start reading this guy.
Okay, I'll send you a column or two, okay?
Okay. Jim, do you have something to say?
I heard Barbara Lee this morning interviewed, and she reminded us all that she was the only person in Congress to vote against it.
Yeah,
That's right.
So she was. So she was. Okay. I finally got that your hand was raised, but it's delayed for some reason. Huh. I don't know. Okay, and then the 1-2 punch on standard setting. Unfortunately, Harold's not here this week, but we talked about the restrictions on the tobacco industry last week, and I think Harold had some questions about that. I hope he's going to watch this video because. I think Homer and I were very positive on the punishment of the tobacco companies, so I just want to put out my bona fides that verify that Walnut Creek was one of the most progressive restrictors of smoking in offices and in restaurants in 1991. The exact date of this essay and report in the LA Times from the archive. And so Ron Bagley, the vice mayor at the time, he led the fight, and he lives right near us, Rudy and Mike. He lived right at the bottom of the hill off of Homestead. And by the way, he was also the
smoking in
that
restaurants.
limited traffic flow on Homestead. No turn at certain times. So he died early, unfortunately. So he wasn't from multiple myeloma, unable to enjoy the success. But you all, I think, probably remember this famous picture.
Famous.
That Harold, if you're watching, let's talk. They all swore that nicotine was not addictive. Well, these people should be regulated. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court now is going to be looking at the ability of our government agencies, what some people are calling the deep state, to come up with regulations. It's chilling what they might decide that our different cabinet agencies can't promulgate rules and laws so free and easy that Congress is supposed to do that. Well, we see how functional Congress is. So, Jesus.
We need agencies.
Yeah. Okay. We've got maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15, to finally get to the main topic. And this is what I love about these sessions, that we can range and talk about different things and everybody jumping in. Let's keep it up. So let's call it Putin's war. What's going on? The ground war is kind of grinding to a stalemate, but there's a lot going on that is very positive for Ukraine. The Moscow air defenses are permeable. Kiev is able to close Moscow airports. The grain deal, the blockade, that's turning out to be leaky, as different kinds of ships are now making it across the Black Sea, from Romania down to the Bosphorus, by hugging the coast of the Black Sea. And some are saying that just this method alone could get it back to 70% of pre-war levels. I might have shown this last week. Excuse me if I'm repeating anything. Public opinion, people are getting a little bit tired. But in Ukraine, people don't want new elections. There's still an overwhelming support for independence and to keep fighting. And as Timothy Snyder once, he still has hopes. Unfortunately, at least temporarily, the approval of new money for Ukraine is a casualty of our fight in Congress. And still, 95% of Ukraine want to keep all their land. And Zelensky's wife is proving good. Zelensky is courting Europe pretty well. He got a setback in Slovakia a few days ago, but he's going to get his F-16s. And he's still trolling Putin about what land he'd be willing to get back. Belgorod, which is within Russia, and which Ukrainian troops have irregulars have controlled. So, but the focus has been on the Crimea. Thanks to David Pepper for this map, just reminding us that the Black Sea has been part of Europe for a long time. These are where Roman coins have been found. So thanks for this graphic, David. It's interesting how many Roman coins have been found in southern India. One of the 12 disciples was it Thomas? One of them, I think it's Thomas.
British House.
I think doubting Thomas wound up in India, and there's a strong Catholic church. Be sure if you're going to talk to each other that you're muted. That some of the strong Catholics in Kerala can be explained by that. Jim.
My Christian history is not perfect, but I don't think Thomas was one of the 12.
Okay, I'll accept that. We'll look it up.
He's looking it up.
Okay, our fact checker's on it. The interesting thing, and the reason that I'm featuring Crimea again, is Zelensky has tapped Tatar to become the next defense chief. And he's a systems guy in the business world. So he's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's cutting out deadwood almost immediately. So I think that this telegraphs that Zelensky is really committed to changing the status of Ukraine. I'm sorry, Crimea. Now, who knows what that'll be, but Erdogan is right behind him. Why? Because the Tatars were Muslim. The Tatars were a Turkic people. And so, of course, he's going to back up Ukraine's claim to Crimea. So we're not doing so well on land. Some of us are a little bit sad about that, expecting another dramatic breakthrough like we got that last September a year ago. But things are going well at sea. A year ago, this key Russian ship was sunk. And I think this was seen as a revenge for the incident on that island. What was the name of that island? Anyway, and then just recently, the British intelligence has claimed that there's a functional defeat and that at sea. And that there's been 220 attacks, peaking in just the last week, 220, and saying this is every bit as important as the land counteroffensive. But there's some caution. Hey, wait a minute, slow down. This could be premature. But there is a story saying the Russian Black Sea Fleet is pulling out of Crimea because they can't cover defending the Black Sea and continue the silent struggle against NATO submarines, I guess, in the Baltic. So this war has many theaters. I thought this was a good map. It's a little bit dated, a couple of weeks old. But this is just shows you all the targets that Ukraine has picked in Crimea. military bases, bridges, major roads, port infrastructure. And you'll remember there's also been successful submarine attacks off this map in Russian ports itself on the Black Sea, halfway to Georgia. Evidence. The UK has really come through big. If places like Slovakia are hesitant, the United Kingdom is not, and they've been supplying Storm Shadow missiles. And one of the British missiles apparently was used to take out the Black Sea Fleet headquarters. And that there was at the time of a leadership meeting. So that gives rise to the success of inside the Russian military, Ukrainian spies. And so they were among the casualty. I mean, the leader was reported dead. That was like Mark Twain said, a little premature. So how are they doing it? I won't get into the details. Some of our participants are more up to date on engineering and military equipment than I, but I found a few interesting photos of these Ukrainian sea drones, and what do they look like? Of course, obviously very different than air drones. But this is what they're up against, Russian mines. But a drone down at the level of a mine can evade minefields quite well. And this is their target. So Sevastopol, we got a Sevastopol in California, great apples. But Sevastopol in Crimea has a really long history. And there are different ways of pronouncing Sevastopol. Huh? Yeah, okay. So I'm sure there's a lot of variations, but here's the target. And so this gets us to a fascinating history of Russia in the Crimea. We left off, you remember, with Catherine the Great and her sidekick Potemkin, right? Yeah. And this is the Russian naval hero, an admiral named Ushakov. And he won the Crimea back from the Ottomans on the sea. And he built the docks in Sevastopol and Kherson, a name we've all become familiar with. He was a deeply religious guy, and he was canonized by the Orthodox Church 1 year after Putin took power. And the rumor is that the Orthodox Church cozied up to Putin and said, "Don't you want to be like Ushakov?" And you'll see later that Putin quotes him in a speech. But Sevastopol really comes into history in the Crimean War, which was between European powers trying to help the sick old man, the Ottoman Empire. We are obviously became enemies in the First World War, but there was a period of time where the Ottomans were retreating in the Balkans, and it was unstable. and it was unstable because wherever the Ottomans retreated, the Russians started to creep in. So they finally drew the line when Russia started creeping into the Danube area, and we've covered that. I won't go over that in detail. But the siege of Sevastopol is just worth reviewing. This is the bulwarks of Sevastopol. There's this big inlet there. And the French get credit for capturing it coming up from the south. And this was their view, the French view, looking up at the bulwarks of Sevastopol. It was a long siege, I think a year long. But Sevastopol was important. A lot of ships going all over the Black Sea, just to review. This is Romania, and what history has taught me is the Danube comes out here, this is probably the way that Vikings got into the heart of Europe, going up the Danube in trade. It's in the news now because it's kind of the border between Ukraine and Romania, and this is where a lot of grain, Ukraine is trying to get grain out either up the Danube or along railroads, but also in these ports here that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So the timeline was interesting. The siege of Sevastopol, but then Tsar Nicholas catches the flu and dies. And so there you go. How does infectious disease influence history? The siege is over. This is the inlet. You can see it a little bit better on the map. So it's a natural harbor that's been built up, starting with Ushakov, but continuing to the present day from space. And all of a sudden, retroactive history comes into play. There are Greek ruins here. We're not surprised because of Pepper's map of Roman coins, but the Greeks had settlements here, so there are ruins. And a lot has been made of that because some of these ruins were pre-Byzantine, but some of them are post-Byzantine and therefore Christian. So this retroactive rewriting of history was taken up by a successor to Ushakov, who got a hold of something called Saint Nestor's Chronicles and came up with the theory that there were Byzantine Christian churches, Constantinople churches out of Constantinople in these ruins, including a basilica. And what could have gone on in the basilica back 500 years before? So the legend, number one, is that Vladimir the Great got all of his Slav subjects to become Christian and follow the Byzantine church in the Dnieper, right outside of Kiev. Legend number two is not only did Vladimir do that, But Vladimir himself was actually baptized very near those ruins that were excavated. Too good to be true, but the theory, all doubts were dispelled. So they found in 1850, the Russians put up a monastery along to give material strength to this legend. And then all of a sudden we get pictures of Vladimir being baptized in a fully formed church. This would have been around 1000, I think. So even today, St. Vladimir's Cathedral is a pilgrimage site. There's a famous statue overlooking Kiev of Vladimir the Great, right near the spot where he had all his Slavic citizens baptized. And guess what? Moscow puts up a statue of Vladimir in 2017, not to be outdone by Kiev. And this, of course, is 3 years after Putin's taken control of Crimea. So I think I might be just about pushing the limit. There's the cathedral, and I'll just finish this slide and turn it over to you, Bob. So Ushakov is no longer a patron, just a simple patron saint. He's also the patron saint of nuclear arms. And so Putin has made speeches that the Orthodox Christianity and nuclear weapons are his two pillars of Russian society. This is where I'm going to end and turn it over to Bob. He quotes Ushakov in 2002 after this war started, rallying his troops. War would glorify Russia, just like Ushakov said. Yeah, Bob, take it away.
Oh, I was going to briefly that what's often forgotten about the Crimean War was that it was actually a pincer movement with the Baltic Sea War at the same time, when the British and French fleets blockaded St. Petersburg, which did enormous economic damage to Russia. And forced them to keep a lot of their troops up defending St. Petersburg at the same time. A friend of mine recently was at the Åland Islands.
Yes.
Now Swedish, but there was, it was not just the Black Sea. It was about the Baltic Sea too. That's
and you prompted me when we did the deep dive on the Crimean War to get a map of the Baltic with those islands. And so for those of you that are interested, you can go back and look at the map that Bob inspired. Okay. Other questions and comments? All right. Well, thank you, you stalwarts, for ignoring my cancellation and showing up after all. It's been a wonderful discussion. I won't be here next week, but in 2 weeks we'll reassemble, and it's Slava Ukraine.
Hey,
Love Ukraine.
hey, can I join you at the talk at the county hospital?
Sure. You won't know the personalities, but sure.
All right.
Thank you.
And
John.
they dumped McCarthy as speaker today.
Yes.
Yeah, they were talking about that.
Saw that, yeah. Whew.
Well, they just did it.
Crazy.
All right, I'm going to stop recording.